What's up, guys? So we're gonna do a quick video. Someone asked me the other day how I do a handle glue up, because I do a lot of screwed on handles, but I figured today I'm doing a glue up on one of my Serpent models. So I figured I would make a quick video to show how I do it. Some gorgeous scales here from Under the Bridge over on Instagram. He does amazing work. So I kind of like to have everything set out before I start anything. And I've already done the dry fit, so I've already put the scales on, I've already pushed the pins through to make sure that they fit right. So we're gonna go ahead and get everything cleaned up and get it going. Let me see. Just get this lacquer thinner open. So I'm gonna clean everything off. And I usually kind of clean everything twice just to make sure nothing's going to keep these from adhering. So kind of the first thing to do with your scales, once you get them all shaped, you get the fronts all done. So the fronts of these are all cleaned up and polished. You also want to scuff the sides that are going to be going against the knife. You want something that epoxy can adhere to. So I usually just run 120 grit sandpaper through the backs of these just to make sure I can get it all scratched up. And then on the knife itself, I kind of hollow out the center, so it also gives kind of that epoxy something to grab onto. Whether that helps or not, I don't know, but it makes me feel a lot better. The other thing I do in the winter all my glue ups inside. I mean, you don't have to start them inside, obviously, but it just gets way too cold in my garage to where the epoxy's not going to set properly. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I don't like to take a chance, so I bring it all inside to make sure. So a little lacquer thinner on the pins as well. The epoxy I'm going to be using is G-Flex, or West Systems G-Flex. Kind of seems to be the belle of the ball around the knife making community. Never had any issues with it. It's not too expensive. It's a 24-hour epoxy. So I'll come back out and work on this tomorrow. Yeah. The other thing I'm going to be using, I usually like to have all my epoxy black, so it helps blend in if there's any gaps. I did do my dry fit, there's no gaps, but the Starbond black pigment, mix it in there with your epoxy and stir it up and it'll turn it black. So let's see here. The other thing, these little cups are very handy. Popsicle sticks also very handy. A couple clamps. I like to get my clamps all ready. So when I do have everything put up, I'm not rushing to get clamps set or anything like that. That's the other good part about having 24-hour epoxy, is you don't have to worry about that. All right, I ran back out to my garage. I grabbed one more clamp. I grabbed a different thing of wax. This one's older. This one I use for finishes, and then a couple of these Q-tips. I buy a lot of super glue, so these come with it, so I use these. So yeah, so we're gonna go ahead. This West Systems epoxy, it's a 1-to-1. I would recommend wearing gloves, but I'm out, so we're not going to. But we're gonna mix this a 1-to-1 ratio. Also, another thing, if your garages or shops get real cold, or even hot, I have a box over here with all kind of my epoxies and hardeners and anything like that. So it keeps them at room temperature. So we're just gonna go ahead and get these mixed in here. Now, one thing I've kind of learned It kind of seems counterintuitive, but if you're gonna have too much of one, you want too much epoxy. It's kind of weird, but if you have too much hardener, for some reason it's not gonna set up. So I got a decent 1-to-1 ratio in there. Probably a little more epoxy than hardener, but that's okay. And then just grab a little bit of this pigment here and drop that in. And then just the smallest amount of pigment that's in there. And then we're just gonna go ahead and get this all stirred up. And okay, so I spent the last couple of minutes mixing this up. I might need a little bit more. I'm not sure yet. Also, I just taped the paper towel around the blade here just to give me something to hold on to if I get epoxy on my hands. But I didn't go all the way down here because you're going to want to be able to wipe off the glue and everything that's on there. So me, I'm kind of methodical a little bit about it. I try not to touch as many things as possible. So I'm going to do one scale. I'll do the knife. I'll put the pins through. I'll do scale, pins, knife, whatever. You'll see. One thing, you can have too much epoxy. Because if you have a ton, you're just going to end up squeezing it out when you clamp these on. You can talk to all the best scale makers in the community, and they'll even tell you thin layers are the way to go. And in my opinion, I've never had any fail with doing thin layers, but just coat the whole thing. Make sure it's nice and even, or as even as you can get it, but you still want enough to where there's just a tad bit of squeeze out, but you don't want to squeeze it so much where it goes all over the place. Okay, so that's how that one looks. So the pins, this is where gloves come in handy. Just put a little bit on the pins, put them through. And also the reason you want to do a dry fit is because now I know my pins will fit. I'm just going to throw a little on this side as well. Okay. Let's go ahead and coat the bottom side of the knife. And when I do the tang, I really just want to fill in that pocket that I hollowed out. I kind of just want to put a bunch in there. You can coat the whole thing like I'm doing, but you already got the scale done, so it's not going to hurt anything if you do it. But my main mission is to get that hollowed out section filled up. And then slide this on here. That one's in, that one's in. Press that down. Okay. And then again, I'm just going to go back in, fill up this little pocket here. I might have just enough, actually. I might have mixed just the perfect amount, which never happens. If you're like me, I used to love 5-minute epoxy because it was great, and then I could just go right back to work on the knife. But then I was sitting here trying to frantically put all the knife scales on, and just it never worked out in my favor, to be honest. And then before you can clean it all up in the front of the handle, it starts to harden, and then you have some leftover epoxy on the blade. It's just a mess. So the biggest thing I've learned on gluing handles is be patient and wait the 24 hours and use 24-hour epoxy. It's a stronger bond, and you don't have to stress. So a little extra up here because I didn't have any down here on the tang. Alright, so let's throw this on here. See if I can line it up. I can't really see. I apologize for the poor lighting in my office. Okay, so You can see it's all on now. You can see some squeeze out right there. And we're gonna go ahead and take care of that. But before that, I'm just gonna throw one clamp on the back here. Well, actually, since I lay these down, I wanna go back through and just push my pins through just a little bit. Make sure they go all the way through. Usually I have a little hammer. Just tap those all the way through. Make sure you have some poking out on both sides. So set that up. As far as clamping, you don't want to clamp these super tight to where you squeeze out every bit of epoxy you just put on there. I just go until it doesn't go anymore, and then just don't squeeze it like you're trying to break it. Okay, just be gentle with it. Squeeze it enough where the epoxy starts to move, but you don't want to squeeze out every bit of epoxy you just put in there. So we'll put one in the back, one in the middle. There we go. I usually like to have one of these just to clear up any empty areas, just to put a little pressure in some spots. And now this is where things start to get a little messy. I'm going to go ahead and clean up these fronts here. Okay, so take these, so like that. These little Q-tips, you can just push all that back in there into the front. Still looks pretty rough currently, and then we'll just take our paper towels. You can never have too many paper towels around when you're doing a glue up, because you will use an abundance of them. Like I think right there, I just put more epoxy on the blade than I did wiping it off. Some people I think are magic. They do handle glue ups, they don't get epoxy anywhere. And I don't understand how they do it. So if you learn, let me know. Okay, so those are pretty clean right there. There's no more squeeze out on either side, so we're good. And then what I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to throw my last C-clamp on the very front here. Hang this off the side so I can actually spin it. And then once I clamp this on, there's still going to be a little bit more squeeze out, and we'll just clean that up again. And then we're going to wax it, and we'll be good to go. Okay. All right, so not a whole lot of squeeze out, which is good. So you can still see, so that clamp pushed out just a tad bit more, not much. We're just gonna go back to the same thing. I'll take this, get a majority of it off. You don't want to dig into if you have any gaps, which you shouldn't have gaps, but if you do, you want epoxy to fill those pockets, if that is the case. So okay, so over the next 24 hours, if you come back out and you check, there's probably going to be a tad bit of movement with the epoxy. It's going to seep out just a little bit, nothing too crazy. So just keep an eye on it if you got to clean up anything. But the other thing I'm going to do is just rub a little wax on it, because if there's any leftover epoxy, this wax will keep it from setting up to where you can just peel it right off. And I mainly want it on the fronts of these scales, because I'm not going to be able to clean those scales off. And then we're going to wipe it on the blade as well. But you don't want to try and push it under that scale if you have any gaps. There's no gaps here, so we should be fine. But if you get wax in there, it's going to be hard for that epoxy to set up in there, and then you're going to end up pulling it out. So I'm going to do that. Make sure there's nothing raining, keep the oil out. But I stopped using lacquer thinner or acetone to clean the fronts, simply because I don't want that acetone will seep down into your scales, and it may not happen very often. It may be perfect, but I don't want the acetone to leak down in there and then eventually start breaking down that epoxy over time. But there we go. That's it. That is how we do a very ugly handle glue up. And then in 24 hours, it'll be ready to go. And it's usually less than 24 hours. If you come back out here and you can feel some of the epoxy you dripped on here, and it's kind of tacky or hard, it's okay to go ahead and work. Just don't get it too hot on the grinder. But cool. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, or whatever else people tell you to do on these things. But thanks.